Good evening, everyone. My name is Fadi Zatari. I would like to welcome all of you. We have today a new seminar. This is number 56. We are focusing today on the new election in Israel. My colleague, Dr. Ramzi Baroud, will be moderating this session. Dr. Ramzi Baroud is a very famous writer who is expert on Palestine. He has a long bibliography to read, but you can just maybe visit his website, ramzibaroud.net. You can see his publication and more information about his bibliography. Yes, Dr. Ramzi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Fadi, for this. And thanks to everyone who's joining us in the latest of the SIGA seminar series. Today's topic is the new extremist Israeli government, its implications for the Palestinians, for the region, and the world. Now, we have three very distinguished speakers with us today, Professor Ilan Pappe, Haneen Zoabi, and Professor Sami Al-Arian. Those of you who is following the story would know that by tomorrow midnight, the deadline given to the potential Netanyahu government to be formed is going to happen tomorrow at the strike of midnight, which means that Netanyahu could potentially be the prime minister of Israel soon after. If he succeeds in forming the government, it will be considered one of the most extreme political cabinets in the history of Israel. Now, I know we've been saying that about pretty much every Israeli cabinet that has been formed in the last 3 years, where we've witnessed 5 different elections. But it really seems that this time around, it is particularly more extreme, more far-right, more fascist even, especially if you look at the who's who of this potential new government. We are going to start with Haneen Zoabi. Haneen Zoabi is a political activist, a member of the National Democratic Assembly, NDA of the Jammu. She is the first Palestinian woman to represent a Palestinian party in the Israeli Knesset. That's between 2009 and 2019. Ms. Zoabi, the floor is yours. You have about 12 minutes. And following that, we will have a session of questions and answers. Please.
Thank you, Ramzi, and I would thank SEGA for this invitation. So as Ramzi said in his introduction, it is not the first time that we are mentioning that the extremist right wing is increasing its force, he is expanding, and the whole Israeli society is shifting toward the right wing. But the main difference that it is not, the story of this election is not just that the right wing has increased his power and he is now in the center of the government, but he has a total new vision of reorganizing the deep state. This is the news. It is not the comeback of the right wing. It is not the increasing strength and expansion. It is the normalization, I think, of the right wing. And it has a with his very ambitious project of reorganizing the deep state, the deep political and legal structure of the Jewish state. This is the news, and this is the news. We are still, of course, talking about a colonialist project. It is not a shift from democracy to extremist right wing. It is not at all. It is not even the shift from a right-wing colonial state to a more fascist colonial state. It's more than that. The argument here, my argument, that the right wing has a very ambitious project. They are very serious in this project of reorganizing the state, not just towards the Palestinians. They have new policies towards the Palestinians, and I will talk about it, but they have also a new vision and a new project about the state itself, even about the internal relations within the Israeli society. So we are talking about a new politics of colonialism, if we can say so. It is the same colonial state, but with a new politics, internal politics. It is a question of how the colonial project will function. It is a new way of function for the regarding this colonial project. And because sometimes I feel a difficulty in expressing myself in English, please, Ramzi, if I am not clear enough, stop me, and I will not feel embarrassed that you will rephrase my idea. So, talking before the meaning, the political meaning, to talking about statistics, we have the Jewish voter turnout was unexpected, was highest with a 7% highest, no, 4% highest than the last election, especially among the right-wing base. So more right-wing base have participated in this election. Those who are leading now the right wing have been disqualified from the Knesset in 1988. So now who are leading the right wing have been out of law in Israel 30 years ago. So in order for talking about a shift or a changes in the deep structure, we should know that this change from out of the law, the movement, the name of the movement of Ben Gvir, the star of this election, he is a supporter of Kahana. So in order to understand what should be done, what was done during these 30 years, that those who were out of law is now leading the government, we should understand that we are talking about a deep change within the political culture of the Israeli society. Of course, it was a gradual, but now it comes to يحصد الثمار. Now they are شو يحصد الثمار?
Harvesting.
Yeah, now they are harvesting this shift, which has been taking, which have been in process during the last 2 decades. The campaign slogan of Ben Gvir, the star, who, and this is the analysis of the Israeli media, that Ben Gvir is leading the government, not Netanyahu, and that Netanyahu and the Likud will lose some of their power for this fascist and extremist religious right wing. His campaign slogan was, "It is time to be landlords of our country." So he is now reflecting a feeling that this violent state has been losing its power for the Palestinians. So he is now trying to rebuild the power of the state, not just in front of the Palestinians in the West Bank, but mainly in front of the Palestinians of 48. So we can say that Ben Gvir is more considered with 48, with the 1.5 million Palestinians within 48, and Smotrich, the second right-wing extremist, whom is with coalition with Ben Gvir, is more concerned about the West Bank. So there is a division of function, division of labor. Ben Gvir is more concerned about 48, about the Palestine, the rebuilding of the state. that changes within the legal system. I will talk about it, changing within the police, changing within the ministries, more privatization of power for the settlers. And Smotrich is concerned more about the sovereignty of the colonialist state within Zone C, within the West Bank. So, okay. Now, those who are opponents of Netanyahu are not different than Netanyahu. They are not really different regarding the colonialist project of expanding the settlements, Judaizing Jerusalem, more Judaizing the state within the borders of 48. They just realized that Netanyahu is the obstacle because of his corruption, is the obstacle for stable government, not because of his political and security politics, not because of his policies towards the Palestinians, because of his corruption. So they are not so different from the political point of view and from the political attitude of this current government. They don't perceive colonialism as a danger. They perceive Netanyahu as a destabilized factor for colonial, stable, and accepted state, internationally accepted. So they don't disagree with Netanyahu in his political project of expanding settlements and Judaizing and violent policies toward the national Palestinian movement, but they define Netanyahu as person to be an obstacle for stable and normal state. This very extremist religious right wing may also reflect a factor of economic destabilization. And yesterday there was a letter signed by 100 high-tech managers calling for Netanyahu to be careful. So this is the more liberal sector of the Israeli society are not so anxious about politics. As I said, they are now more anxious and worried about the economic stability, the Israeli economic stability. Now, I have just 12 minutes. I will shift towards the Palestinians and return back to the Jewish Israeli policies after that. So among the Palestinians, the turnout remained lower than among the Israelis. 54% have voted, but it is 10% more than the last election. The last election, 44% have voted. The party, Muwahhadi, the Islamic party, who was in the Israeli coalition, wins most of the vote of the 54. I will just look for the numbers here. It went 32% to the Muslim movement, who was part of the Israeli government coalition, Bennett-Lapid government, despite having few political gains to show for the public, but it managed to maintain support, not for ideological reasons, not because its base is so enthusiastic to be in the coalition, more because of conservative religious reasons and apathy, indifference They just went. Part of them, I would say, didn't know that Ra'am or this Islamic party was part of the coalition. Tens of youth that I have met in the street the day of the election and days before, I asked them what you will vote. They said for the Islamic movement. I said, do you know that you are voting for the Israeli government? They said, no, we don't know. So it is not, I don't want to give this impression that the coalition, being part of the Israeli coalition, fascist Israeli coalition, is enjoying a majority within the Palestinian street. The Communist Party was the second party, 30% of the voters, 30% of 54%, and Balad, my party, when 22.5%. We failed to cross the 3.25% threshold, but we did far better than expected, because we, as the only Arab party, the only Palestinian party, which challenged the definition of Israel as a Jewish state, supporting a vision of equal citizenship, national and civic equality, state for all of its citizens. We were in the middle of an incitement campaign, not just from the Israelis, but even from the other Palestinian parties. So 22% in circumstances that everybody labeled us as extremists, as radical, as unrealistic, as emotional, as qawmajidin, nationalist, which nationalist, radical nationalist, enjoying or receiving 22% is perceived as a kind of a success. So within the Knesset, there is no party now, Balad is outside the Knesset, no party which challenge Israel as a Jewish state, which challenge the definition of Israel as a colonialist project. The 10 seats of the Palestinian two parties, the Muslim and the communist, they don't have a platform of challenging the definition. They call for equality. They call to fight discrimination, but they are strategically, they don't have a strategic challenge. They have a political challenge. We can perceive them as a political challenge for discrimination. But within colonialism, you need more than that. You need a strategic challenge for the state as a colonial tool. But because of
Thank you very much, Haneen. Thank you very much. We are going to be touching on some of these very, very important issues in the questions and answers later on. Haneen spoke about the current phenomenon in terms of the reorganizing of the deep state in terms of structure. She speaks of new politics of colonialism in Israel, the deep change within the political structure, and the time to harvest the political gains of these extremist movements in the last 20 years or so. She also discussed the rebuilding of the power of the state per the view, of course, of these individuals being there and others, and of course about the economic destabilization and many other important topics. And I believe we are going to be touching on some of these topics later on in this conversation. Our next speaker is Professor Ilan Pappe. Professor Pappe is a professor at the University of Exeter. He was formerly a senior lecturer in political science at the University of Haifa. He is the author of many seminal books, including The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, The Modern Middle East, A History of Modern Palestine, One Land, Two Peoples, 10 Myths About Israel, and his latest co-edited, which he co-edited, Our Vision for Liberation. Pappe is described as one of Israel's new historians who, since the release of the pertinent British and Israeli government documents in the early 1980s have been rewriting the history of Israel's creation in 1948. Professor Pappe, you have 12 to 13 minutes, after which we listen to Professor Sami Al-Arian, and then we will have a period of questions and answers. The floor is yours.
So, thank you, Ramzi, and thank you, Siga.
Dr. Ilan, you need to be on the English channel.
We
You
cannot
go to
hear.
the interpretation button
How do I get to an English channel?
and
I'm
mute
really
original
sure,
audio.
so, where do I get to the? Okay, chat interpretation, I suppose.
We
Okay,
cannot
still
hear.
can.
Yeah, English. Okay. Is that better now?
Okay, you need to be in the English channel, and under
I am
it,
on the
mute,
English channel.
in the bottom there is a mute original audio. In the bottom of the screen, when you hit English, there is in the bottom it says mute original audio. Do you see it?
Original audio, and there is English. Shall I go to the English,
Yeah.
right?
Go to English, and then after that, click mute original audio.
Oh, I see. Okay, okay,
Yeah.
I see. Good. I think I've done it now.
All
Is
right.
that okay now?
Yes.
Excellent. Very good. Okay. Sorry, I was stuck in traffic, but I'm very glad I made it. Thank you, Ramzi, for
I
your
don't
kind.
hear Ilan.
Yeah, we still can't hear you, Ilan.
You can't
Yeah,
hear
the
me.
same.
Okay.
Okay.
Everybody needs to be in the English channel. And
Yes.
Ilan, I can hear him, his English channel and mute original audio. You may have to go and refresh, everybody. Go and
Okay.
refresh.
Can everybody hear me now?
I can hear you.
How do we
Ramzi?
do that?
Just go back and unmute and mute again. Mute original audio.
Oh. Okay.
Okay. Try Ilan one more time.
Can you hear me, Ramzi?
No. Okay.
No.
All right. Okay. That's a problem. It's very strange. Okay. Why don't you go to original audio and then go back to English and mute, Ilan. Try one more time.
Okay, I'll do unmute.
We can hear you now.
Because I'm muted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Ramzi, can you hear him?
I can't hear him, unfortunately.
The same like
Why-
Ramzi. I cannot hear him.
Oh, you cannot hear. Okay. Okay. I'm not sure. Omar, can you hear him?
And Ilan, done?
Yes.
Okay, everybody, why don't you, the translator can hear, and I can hear. You can go to the original audio, and you will hear him. Then we'll figure out what to do with the English.
Okay.
لا إيلان معقول لما حط زي عمل غلطتي أنا ما حطيتش done كنت أعمل الأشياء بس ما أحطش done بالآخر.
But we can hear him. I can hear him on the English channel. I am on the English channel and I can hear him, and the translator can hear him. I'm not sure why everyone else can. Okay, but if you go to original audio, you will hear him. All right.
Okay.
You don't
good.
have to be in the English, and you can hear him. All right. But he needs to be English so that the translator can translate, and the translator can hear him fine. So we're okay. Just go to the original audio and you will hear him. Okay. Let me know if you can't hear him, Ramzi and Haneen. All right. Go ahead, Ilan.
Can you hear me, Ramzi?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Now
Okay,
we
very
hear you.
good.
Now it's good. Oh.
Excellent. So shall I continue?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. It's okay. Okay. Let me start again. Thank you so much, Ramzi, for your kind introduction. Thank you, Dr. Al-Arian, for the invitation. Apologies for not being with you at the very beginning for technical issues, but I'm glad I'm here. I'm with you now, and I have about 12 to 13 minutes to give you my take on the last developments, and actually what I would call the formal announcement of Israel as an apartheid state. I will mention few points with regard to this development or the way historical Palestine is going to be affected, to my mind, after the election of the 1st of November 2022. I think for many of us, it's very clear that the basic processes that affected the life of the Palestinians, wherever they are, will not change dramatically compared to the previous years. And one good example for this is the fact that the government that is now ending its 1 year in office has executed probably a far more brutal policy of killing, of house demolition, and other inhuman measures that were far worse than any of those executed by the last Netanyahu government. So in many ways, we are reminded by the way the late Patrick Wolf defined settler colonial projects like Zionism as projects which are not events, but are structures, which really means that there is an ideological structure, there's an ideological infrastructure. If you want, a kind of a DNA for a certain project, and therefore, whatever the composition of its government or whatever its political elite is made of, it doesn't change the basic aspiration and vision, and therefore strategies and policies on the ground throughout the years. So in that respect, even if some people worry, and maybe justifiably, that some of the actions towards specific Palestinian groups would be even harsher and more brutal, although they are so harsh and brutal now that it's very difficult to see where else can they go. In the big scheme of things, we are still there with the same government, political elite, economic elite, and more importantly than anything else, security and military elites, which are trying to police millions of Palestinians in historical Palestine, and of course remain adamant in their refusal to allow the return of the Palestinian refugees. The only possible change, or there are two possible changes that can be triggered by the last elections. And again, we're very near to those elections, although we have an idea about the composition of the future government, but we still are waiting to see its final composition and strategy. But there are two, as I say, if you want, impacts that potentially would be triggered by these elections. The first one has to do with exposing what maybe for some people, I'm sure not for the people who watched this webinar, and not for the panelists whom I know very well, but I think it's possible that for certain sections of the world public opinion, this kind of an explicit apartheid state with explicit policies of dispossession, discrimination, and racism might help to move a certain section that maybe was still hanging on to the charade or to the myth that all in all, Israel is still the only democracy in the Middle East. And even if it goes through periods of bad governments, basically the project itself is valid and should not be condemned, negated, or struggled against. So there is one possibility that, like the op-ed of the New York Times yesterday, that tries to navigate, quite pathetically, I should say, between a commitment for Israel and a commitment to what it calls democratic values, and claiming that there's a danger that the current Israeli government would make it difficult to see that Israel is an ally that shares with America the same values of democracy, which is a big question in both cases, both of America and Israel. But there is a certain group of liberal Zionists, or maybe liberal Zionists on the verge of becoming anti-Zionists, who need this push into a position into a clearer position of condemnation and rebuke. And this is particularly true, I think, about Jewish communities in the world. Jewish communities and friends of Jewish communities, you want, in the West in particular, develop this image of what I call fantasy Israel, that it's a thriving democracy, that Zionism did succeed in creating a society that is both Jewish and just in terms of democratic values, liberal values, maybe for some of them even in terms of socialist values. And although they get a reality check every few minutes that shows them that actually this kind of definition does not tally with what we see on the ground, whether it's the Israeli apartheid law of 2018, or whether these are the laws already legislated 2010, not to mention the brutal assaults on Gaza and in the West Bank, or even the fact that a respectful international human rights organization such as Amnesty is defining Israel as an apartheid state. All these reality checks until now have been contained, I would say, by the supporters of what I call fantasy Israel. As I say, most of them are Jewish, but not all of them are Jewish, and they are important not so much because of their numbers, but because of their location at the very heart of economic, political, academic, and military elites in the West. And it seems, from what one can hear in the last few weeks, that some of these endorsers of fantasy Israel find this time the reality check so stark, so explicit, so powerful, namely the way the Israeli government is composed and the results of the elections, that they begin to have doubts whether they can really continue and continue with this elastic, moral position and kind of juggling words in order to cover immorality and injustice that in many cases when it comes to the Jews, it's done in their names as supposedly the Jewish nation. So we will see how far this kind of shock or trauma in a way to the system of the big group that believes in fantasy Israel would affect their future solution. I'm not totally sanguine about this, but I think it's interesting to see that there are some cracks in this wall outside of Israel. The second impact that with this would be my second, the last bit of my contribution, which I think is even more important than the first one, is something that time will tell whether it's going to snowball into a significant development, or maybe we're seeing something that will take time to mature. There is a section of the Israeli Jewish society which is essential for the Israeli economic success, military success or capacity, and in many ways is also responsible for, be it a precarious but nonetheless existent or present social cohesion. And this particular group, which in terms of, which in Marxist terms can be defined as the middle class and upper middle class of Israel, with a clear, not clear, but quite clear, I would say, ethnic characteristics and origins, are really traumatized by the result of the elections. Many of them, I know it's from personal knowledge, have already started thinking of moving outside of Israel. I think this emigration, with the E, not with I, this emigration will continue. I think it started, by the way, before. As you probably know, there are 40,000 Israelis in the city of Berlin alone. And all these 40,000 belong to that group that manages the state of Israel. Israel would lose a certain capacity that maybe will not be translated immediately in the fight against the Lions Den fighters in Nablus, or against the Hamas military capacity in the Gaza Strip, or even against the Hezbollah. But anything beyond that kind of military resistance, anything beyond the existence that still depends totally on the United States for economic and diplomatic assistance, the ability to be autonomous and resilient without that, and without that community, would be significantly undermined. And whoever stays behind in terms of solidarity, in terms of commitment, in terms of ability, would, I think, shatter further the myth of Israel invincibility, an invincibility that quite a few people in the Arab world and the Muslim world still believe in. And I think that that is something that maybe I'm an historian, and with this I would end, Ramzi, I know I'm exceeding my time. This kind of undermining of the invincibility, or shattering the myth of invincibility, is not only important materially, namely that ontologically on the ground, that's what actually happens. It is also very important epistemologically. By this I mean it creates its own weakness by a sense of weakness. And really, the more we look at this 21st century, and with this I would end, the more we see growing opportunities for the Palestinians to change their reality if they could seize these opportunities. And of course, they could not do it alone. They need the Muslim world for that. They need the Arab world for that. And they need at least some international support. But I think it's important to understand that a fierce country is not a strong country. Is not I'm sorry, a fierce state is not a fierce state. We should, and this kind of fierceness, this kind of extreme interpretation of your own ideology, we have seen in the last years of the apartheid regime in South Africa. Now, I'm not saying that we can sit around and it will happen. Of course, this moment has to be seized. But I think the elections and the result of the elections should also be read in terms of failure, defeat, dismantlement, rather than a successful, triumphant chapter in the history of the settler colonial project of Zionism in historical Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilan, for this excellent articulation. Haneen, I've been told by our technical people that we need to switch back our channels to English and I believe unmute original audio in order for us to be able to be heard or translated. Again, thank you very much, Ilan, for this. There's an excellent article written by Ilan, his latest editorial or op-ed in the Palestine Chronicle, discussing this very issue that is of fantasy Israel, and the fact that liberal Zionists are now finding themselves in this quite a difficult quandary where on one hand, they want to continue to promote the illusion of Israeli democracy and freedom and all of that. But on the other hand, they have to face up to the fact that Israel has ideologically shifted a great deal from their original position. So will they carry on with the fantasy Israel, or will they actually turn against Zionism altogether? Our next speaker is Professor Sami Al-Arian. Professor Al-Arian is the director of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs, SIGA, and a public affairs professor at Istanbul Sabahattin Zaim University. He was a tenured academic in the United States for many years. Dr. Al-Arian also has written dozens of articles and studies that were translated into many languages, focusing on U.S. foreign policy, Palestine, and the Arab Spring. Professor Arian, you have 13 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ramzi, for your kind introduction and for moderating this session. I might add also that Ramzi is a non-resident fellow with the center. I also want to thank my colleagues, Haneen and Ilan, for their presentations. I have some reflections that I would like to share on the latest elections and the rise, not just of the right-wing Israeli government, because actually this has been a gradual rise ever since Begin was elected back in 1977. We're talking about 45 years that this has been taking place. What has manifested this year and this election really is the how this rise has been cemented. So now we no longer have what Ilan mentioned, a fantasy or a romantic vision of a Zionist movement. Zionism as a political movement has always been very clear about its objectives. Its main objective is to replace the native Palestinian people in their land by Jewish communities from around the world. And it's very interesting that after 75 years of this project, and of course that project started long before then, 50 years before then. So we're talking about 125 years of this project. Today, in the land of Palestine, from the river, between the river and the sea, between the river Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea, the number of the Jewish population is about 47%. That is the figure that the official Israeli government would give you in terms of the number of people who live. And yet, these 47% have not been moving towards trying to accommodate the rest of the people. On the contrary, what this elections has shown us basically that we no longer have anyone who would advocate anything but the concept of greater Israel, exclusive Israel, Jewish supremacy type philosophy that was voted on in the previous Knesset, and the previous Knesset, we're talking about 2 Knesset ago in 2018, about the Jewish law and so on and so forth. So the first observation concerning the philosophy of the state and how for many years people were arguing that Zionism is a liberation movement, that it is a self-determination movement, that it is a movement that is willing to accommodate its population, what we sometimes refer to as liberal vision of Zionism. That has been now exposed to be a myth and exposed to it's a mirage. We no longer have so-called left in the state. What Haneen mentioned, the rise and the control of the deep state. Secondly is about, of course, Israeli society. Israeli society, as I said, has become has embraced fascist ideologies. Today, when you look at the number of those who would fall into this camp, it's even beyond 64 seats. Yes, Netanyahu's coalition could be 64 seats, but in fact, when you look at the other composition of other parties within the Knesset and what they believe in terms of Israeli supremacy, Jewish supremacy, in terms of how they look at the rest of the population, not just what is called Arabs, Israeli Arabs or Arabs in the 1948 areas, but even across. These are people who are completely fascists, who completely are willing to do whatever it takes to empty the land. So the Israeli society itself has embraced these ideologies, and every elections it becomes even worse in terms of what they embrace. The third observation has to do, of course, with the Palestinians' inside, and I think Haneen alluded to this in her remarks, but you could see that the Palestinians now all, not just under occupation, the West Bank, or under siege in Gaza, or even the diaspora. I think even the Israeli, the Palestinians living in the 1948, they all see themselves as being one people, not people who are divided, but that their fate is going to be the same, that their assault is on all of them, not just on one segment over the other. The fourth observation has to do with the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and in Jerusalem. We could see that the so-called two-state solution, even though it's been dead for a long time, and I think everybody who knows anything about politics and about the progress has admitted to this, except of course the Palestinian Authority and few people here and there. They're using the illusion of having the possibility of two-state solution. I think that's been not only renounced dead, but it's been shown that Israel is not just not interested in negotiations, not even interested to admit or to say anything about any future, any political future or political process, by bringing these extremist ideologies, not fringes. These are people who will be at the heart of this government, who are there to implement policies that would not only try to annex the West Bank and legalize settlements and use what is called iron fist policies against Palestinian resistance, but these people are committed to the project of Greater Israel and to the project of Jewish supremacy. Just look at the names of such parties that Netanyahu has allied himself with: Jewish Power, Religious Zionism, and so on and so forth. These are people who have track records. They cannot deceive anyone about what their true motivation and what their true objective is. It is to establish Greater Israel, to empty the land of Palestine, to dispossess Palestinians, to marginalize the Palestinians who live in the 1948 areas, and basically to establish a pure Jewish Zionist state. They don't care about even the appearance of being democratic or the appearance of liberal values. And that's not even, these are the two, but even we use the other parties like Dere and others. These are people who are very much committed to these kind of philosophies. The fifth observation has to do also with the project concerning what would be the future from these people's point of view. What will be the future of the Palestinians? And I think it's pretty clear right now is that Jordan is going to be the biggest loser. And there is a possibility, I wouldn't put it at a great possibility, but over time it might be a great possibility, that the future of Palestinians, according to this view, is going to have to be looked at in the East. They would like eventually, and this is not a new idea. This idea has been with the right for a long time, that Jordan is Palestine. The majority of Palestinians, if they need a state, that's where the state lies. And therefore, the death of the two-state solution not only has been announced, but also the possible bridge for a future Palestinian state across the river. And therefore, there is a danger. I wouldn't put it also at high at this point, but over time, if there is no resistance and pushback, this could also be a possibility, particularly if there is great polarization across the world. There is a huge international crisis somewhere, is to try to impose, change the government in Jordan, establish some kind of a proxy state, something like the Palestinian Authority that today is under the thumb of the Israeli security establishment, and establish a regime that would be in name a regime that represents the Palestinians. The point is that they would like to change the geopolitical nature of the regional situation, so that they can argue that there is an existing Palestinian state. There is no need, after they have basically eaten up the whole West Bank. There is no doubt that there is no two-state solution, that the purpose of the Palestinian Authority today is simply to administer, to manage Palestinian affairs, but more importantly, with the security coordination, is to protect Israeli settlers and the Israeli plans from a mass uprising by the Palestinians. So my next observation is about what is the possibility. And I think now, every day, this is a possibility, particularly with the encroachment every day now on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, on these religious sacred grounds, by settlers, by the Ben Gvir crowd and his cohorts, in trying to impose some sort of a new arrangement on these sacred grounds. So what happens here is that there is a possibility, again, it will gradually be strengthened, it will gradually become stronger, of the mass uprising. And with it could be the end of the Palestinian Authority, which would put the world on notice that what we're talking about today is new facts on the ground, that these kind of policies that are being pursued and that are being not only pursued, but putting facts on the ground, that these are not sustainable. The American administration, people around the world, other powers, European Union and others, they now cannot hide behind that there is some sort of a political process or some sort of a political solution on the horizon based on a two-state solution. They have to face up to the reality that either they will have to back up an apartheid-like state, which trying to impose its vision not only on the Palestinians, but on the whole region, which would be detriment to their interests. Now, Netanyahu came and saying that his greatest political project would be to have a rapprochement or some kind of an accommodation, open accommodation with Saudi Arabia. Of course, Saudi Arabia, regardless of who is in charge there, has the symbol of being the place where the holy shrines, the holy mosques are situated, and therefore it is to Netanyahu and his ilk the biggest prize. And I think with Saudi Arabia, we've seen other regimes such as the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and of course before that Jordan and Egypt, having these kind of peace treaties. All these regimes now will be put on notice that they will have to actually show their true colors. They can be a part of an Israeli hegemonic vision, and they could be playing junior partners to that, or they would have to actually distance themselves from such a vision. And I think that would also encourage the rest of the people around the region, in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, to show even bigger solidarity. We've seen it. We've seen what Palestine means. I mean, in the World Cup, it's very interesting. I've been here a few days in Qatar, and I've seen people who are not even Arab or Muslims who come to me and say, "Free Palestine," from Argentina, from different places. You could see that there is hunger worldwide if the Palestinians actually start mass uprising, mass demonstrations, mass resistance. The world is hungry and waiting and ready to embrace such a movement that will put these people on notice. So the implications here are not just negative implications. They could very well be positive implications. We've seen in May 2021 how the Palestinians living in 1948 immediately embraced the fact that they cannot be on the sidelines, that they are part of this resistance, that they will rise up and will be ready to actually take their part. Now, that tells us that what is the international community have been trying to do, and this is my last point, what the so-called international community is trying to do is to sweep this under the rug somehow and try to control the Palestinians through the Palestinian Authority, through some economic bribes, and hope that somehow things would change over time. And I think we've been seeing that at least since 2014, since the last so-called negotiations administered by America. But I think after almost 8 or 9 years of this, people are admitting that this is no longer the case, and therefore either some kind of an international organization such as United Nations and others would have to come and start some sort of a pushback against the Israeli state and the Israeli body politics, or they would have a massive problems on their hand, by which the Palestinian struggle is going to become a struggle against a fascist government that would see every day a struggle. We are seeing it right now. It hasn't taken its proper admission by many powers, but we are seeing every day that Palestinians are resistant, particularly in the West Bank, particularly around Jerusalem and other flash points. But I think what might happen actually, sooner or later, Abbas is going to depart the scene. There will not be a real attempt to reconstitute the Palestinian Authority in the way it has been. That structure will collapse. The people in power today want it to collapse, and there will be so much instability and so much chaos, in which case I think the world would have to come to its senses and start pushing these kind of fascist tendencies that have been taking place. And I think with the competition with China, with the war in Ukraine, the United States, which has been the backer, the principal backer of the Zionist state, would have also to take or admit that changes either would have to take place or its own interest would be in jeopardy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this excellent intervention, Dr. Sami. One particular point, and before I talk about this point, just would like to tell our listeners, our viewers, that we have about 25 minutes left, and we are going to dedicate those to questions and answers. I would like to be fair to all of our speakers, so I will add 2 extra minutes to Haneen to elaborate on any of the points that she wants to discuss. And I'm going to actually go directly to Haneen and ask her this. One of the points raised by Dr. Al-Arian is that there is this growing awareness that the collective fate of all Palestinians, or that all Palestinians are united ultimately, regardless of where they are in the world. So my question is this, Haneen. Something has been shifting in Palestinian society in Israel, whether the Unity Intifada of May 2021 started this trend or at least accelerated it, or accelerated an existing shift. The Palestinians who are living in Israel today seem to be developing a different kind of identity, where they see themselves as part and parcel of a larger Palestinian political collective and political discourse in the occupied territories and elsewhere. So the question is, how are Palestinian Arab parties in Israel reacting to this shift? And do you think that these parties represent the collective aspirations of Palestinian Arabs in Israel, considering the low turnout of Arab voters in the November 1st elections?
Okay, thank you, Ramzi. Okay, allow me to be maybe less optimistic than the conclusion, and maybe Ilan will agree with me. I would not say that we reached the point where we decided and we believed that we must reconsider the political premises of our work, of struggling for equality within the Israeli boundaries, not just geographical boundaries of 48, but within the Israeli state. I wouldn't say that the old traditional Palestinian elite within 48 has reached the point where they say, okay, now we don't have any more illusions, and we should reconsider our vision of two-state and of that we are an internal Israeli part, and our political destiny is different than the political destiny of the rest of our people. I wouldn't say that the elite, the parties, are now reconsidering. It is so clear that they feel crisis, they feel a dead end, they feel that they lost their comfortable zone, the maneuvering between the liberal dimension of the state and the colonial dimension of the state. They still want to be part and not to be part of, they are insisting to be part of the Israeli politics. Look at the Tawsiyah of Gantz, recommendation of Gantz, just 2 years ago, 2 years after Qanun al-Qawmiyya, the Israeli nation state law, and after the deal of the century, the Palestinian politics become more Israeli than before. So the crisis, the Palestinian parties is part of the crisis and not part of the solution in this particular moment. The hope is located outside the Palestinian parties. Maybe the hope is with youth movement, which is also not united. They don't represent a consensus. They are not united under one umbrella, organizational umbrella, and even not under an organized and unified political vision. I would call this period of ضياع, a period of شو ضياع?
Lost.
Yeah, a period of lost. It is. I am not so optimistic that now there is no illusion, and we need to reconsider ourselves as part of the united Palestinian people, and there is no way of maneuvering with the old slogan of Jewish and democratic state. I think it is so early to talk about a new politics within 48, and I would say it depends what will happen outside the political parties, not within the Palestinian political parties.
I thank you very much, Haneen. Very clear and concise. If I may move to Professor Pappe. I know, Professor, that you've already spoken about the Zionist left, the soft left, more or less, in your introduction. Some would say that if there is anything in common between the last 5 elections in Israel, is the almost complete absence from the Israeli political agenda of the Israeli occupation, the settlement, illegal settlement enterprises, Israeli apartheid, of course, or even the mere attempt at articulating or putting forth anything that could resemble a peace plan, even by the poor standards of Israel, liberal and leftist Zionist parties. We have been talking about the irrelevance and the slow disappearance of the left in Israel for quite some time now. Is it fair to say that the Israeli so-called soft Zionist left has finally actually disappeared? And if yes, what are the possible consequences of such disappearance?
Thank you, Ramzi, for your question. So first of all, let's examine the first part of your question. I think that it's almost disappeared. I mean, surely there are enough people who would still define themselves as liberal Zionists, socialist Zionists, but for all intents and purposes, as a political force, as a force that can have an impact on policies, that can have a transformative impact on politics, this kind of Zionist force has disappeared. And it's not surprising. This is something to do with the fact that for a certain moment in the history of Israel, and maybe Professor Al-Arian is right, maybe it was that moment was extended as late as 1977, you could have argued as an Israeli Jew to yourself and to others that there is a certain exceptional oxymoronic reality in Israel. Namely that, yes, we committed ethnic cleansing in 1948, but this is a Jewish ethnic cleansing. You cannot judge it like you judge any other ethnic cleansing. Yes, we have a certain regime of apartheid, but again, this, you have to remember, this is a Jewish state apartheid, so it should be exempted from the usual critical analysis or rebuke. And the same is true about Jewish racism. You can talk about Muslim racism, you can talk about Hindu racism, and of course you can talk about Islamic racism, but you're not allowed almost to talk about Jewish racism. And this kind of exceptionalism provided immunity, which was sustained by the belief that there is indeed a political force within Israel who tries to navigate more successfully, less successfully, between universal values of human rights and the racist nature of Zionism. The famous maxim of the Jewish democracy. Israel is both a Jewish state and a democratic state. Now, ever since the right wing has come to power in the late 1970s, and ever since more and more information has been accessible, ever since the PLO was able to provide information through research centers, through a new generation of academics, a new generation of journalists, many of them we have both edited in our book, Our Vision for Liberation, it was impossible to create a sense of validity that if you knew anything of what was going on the ground, that this kind of oxymoron of a liberal ethnic cleanser or a progressive colonizer is really something that can be upheld in reality. And I think that also the Jewish electorate in Israel understood. I mean, they felt like this is impossible to argue. It doesn't really happen. And you have only two choices. You either go for the democracy and human rights, but you give up the idea of a Jewish state, or you stick to the idea of a Jewish state and you give up on the values of democracy, human rights, and civil rights. And as a result, we don't have the time to analyze, but as a result of certain historical circumstances, processes, and has to do a little bit also with the Jewish religion, the vast majority of Israeli Jews prefer to live in a non-democratic, ethnic, racist Jewish state than living in a non-Jewish democratic state of any kind. You can call it an Arab Palestinian state, you can call it the one democratic secular state, doesn't matter. That's a choice that they don't want to, so far, to adopt. So yes, in this respect, cheating to yourself and cheating the world becomes a very exhausting exercise. And there's a fatigue, and I think that fatigue has killed liberal Zionism. As for the second part, very quickly, of your question, I think that the implication of that should be very, very clear. This is very important for both governments and societies in the world, wherever they are, including the Arab world and the Muslim world. Anyone who develops a model, which was the basis for the peace process, the so-called peace process in the last 50 years, the model that says, you know, we need a change from within Israel, even a small change from within Israel, to enable moving forward with reconciliation, peace, and justice, call it what you want. This analysis is proven to be totally invalid as a result of what we were talking about. So there is a need now for anyone who's involved in whatever way in attitudes, policies, positions towards the Palestine issue, as it is called, to answer the question, since it's very clear that there's not going to be a change within the Jewish society, what do you suggest to do to prevent the further destruction of Palestine and the suffering of the Palestinians? What is your answer, morally, politically, economically, and so on? And there's no other way of phrasing the question that is now posed to the civil society that already answered very loudly, we believe in boycott and divestment, and the governments who are very hesitant to impose sanctions.
Thank you very much, Ilan, for the answer, which I'm going to try to build my question to Sami around this idea, because we discussed the transformation happening in Palestinian society. We have discussed transformation happening within the ranks of liberal Zionists and the difficult choices they have ahead. But my question to you, Professor Arian, is the leaders of the extremist Israeli parties today, the religious Zionism, Otzmat Yehudit, seem to be the true winners of these elections, especially as they have doubled their votes compared to previous elections, and they have become the kingmakers, more or less, in this upcoming government of Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, this is particularly alarming to as these characters represent the extremist face of, if you will, an already extremist movement. What do you think the political dynamics, or what are the political dynamics rather within Israeli politics that have resulted in such a massive rise of the far right within the Zionist movement? And do you think that shift towards the far right will continue in the coming years?
Well, first of all, I think this is an illusory success, an illusory win. The nature of Israeli politics is that small groups, when they're given the power, they get much more power than their numbers show. I mean, these are a few 100,000 people, but they have been able to hijack the whole process. Even though they may think themselves that they are kingmakers, or they are the ones who are imposing their extremist or their agenda. I wouldn't call it extremist, because the Zionist movement has always had that grand vision. The question was, when would it be imposed? When would it succeed in fulfilling its final promise to the Jewish people? I mean, these people have been trying to hasten it. And I think with it, they will destroy the state faster. And I think the whole notion of making this, particularly with these groups, as a religious war, which they have been trying, that would also precipitate and accelerate the other side from being even more determined to prevent that from taking place. And I think we could see what happened in May 9th, 2021, is that with the the attempt by these extremist movements to impose their vision in Al-Aqsa Mosque. There was a huge outcry, not only in Palestine, but throughout the Muslim world. And of course, they wanted, I mean, Israel was trying to stop the war, which had the strongest army in the fight. And yet they were more interested in stopping that war because of the possibilities that could have taken place. It also invigorated the people within the Arab people. I think that was a shock after decades and decades of trying to mute them. They exploded. My take on this is that that this fight is not going. This fight is a long fight. Whoever is going to give up the fight is going to be the loser. And I think what these people are doing is they're changing the nature of the fight. And I think Israel, and I have alluded to that in different talks, has certain imperatives that keep it going, keep it strong. I talked about 12 imperatives. And what these people are doing is that hastening some of these strengths. These are points of strength for them, and it would make them weaker. I don't think having a program where you are trying to become an exclusivist state, even that is the nature of Zionism, but they were able to cloak it, to change it, to present it differently. And I think that would weaken their international support. I think over time also it will weaken the society itself. Ilan alluded to the fact that there is a segment within Israeli society which is probably the most productive. Thomas Friedman, in his latest, even he's a hardcore Zionist, he had to admit that there are a group of people who put them at 20% who are totally disillusioned with what's happening. And over time, they might leave the states. And he said that these are the basic taxpayers that have been taking care of the state for decades. And if that, over time, if that happens, also that will also weaken the state. Their international state standing has taken hit, and I think that would continue. The whole system within Israel that's trying to manipulate and trying to what Haneen discussed as the deep state, the security establishment, the defense, and so on and so forth. The defense establishment, all these are being weakened. We're talking about the rise of the Israeli right, where they don't serve in the army, they don't pay taxes, and yet they are imposing their views in the rest of society. That's going eventually to weaken it. Add to that 22% of the population who are totally alienated. These are the Arabs. That will also weaken. So when you look at all these dynamics put together over time, whether domestically or regionally, because they have exposed themselves even to their partners who have been trying to bring to their camp, these Arab states, that would also would be called peace, if at all. So when you add the domestic part to the regional part to the international part, that eventually is going to catch up with the state. Now, if we add to this whole thing, is that okay? This is what they're doing. What are we doing? That's the next question. It's not just one side that is being weakened. The other side also have to strengthen. And I think that's where the onus is on us, how we can build a movement worldwide that would actually confront this apartheid type state. I mean, this is a question that the movement in South Africa was facing back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and culminated eventually into a worldwide movement that made that system totally crumble. I mean, the last government to admit that was the government of the United States, which was backing up and supporting the apartheid regime. And before that, of course, you had Britain and others. So I think I'm not saying it's exactly the same fight. I think this is much tougher, but the ingredients are the same. Is that we need to build this worldwide movement that will support. I always tell people that the Palestinians, and that's a problem with some of the Palestinian factions. They think the Palestinians on their own can defeat Israel and its sources of power. And I say, that's not correct. I mean, the Palestinians are an important ingredient. And the formula that I use, I say usually, is that you cannot dismantle the Zionist movement or Zionist state with the Palestinians only, and you cannot do it without them. So you need both. So yes, the Palestinians are trying to do their part. The Palestinians are resisting. They are rising up. They are trying to do their best, but on their own, it's not enough. We need to start the building of mass worldwide movement that can engage Zionism and the Zionist state on all fields, socially, politically, economically, diplomatically, human rights, legally, in sports and artistically, in every facet, in every field, in every geography. That's what needs to be done. And I think it was shock to Israelis when they came to Qatar, and that's where you have hundreds of thousands of people coming from all over the world, and they didn't find any welcoming party here. In fact, they were totally isolated. And I think that's their shock. They think all what they have to do is to befriend the regimes and everything will be taken care of. And they found that the masses are on a different tune.
Thank you very much, Professor Arian, for this. The mass worldwide movement will be the last point we are going to discuss. We started a bit late, so we are going to add a few extra minutes here, if you can bear with us. I'm going to ask Haneen. I know, Haneen, that you've already said that you are not terribly optimistic about, the political consciousness of the elites who are still trying to navigate whatever spaces available to them to serve their own interests. But the challenge is the Israelis are presenting, or this extremist government is going to be presenting an extremely difficult challenge that it's going to be quite difficult to find as Palestinian community in Israel to find their way around it, with the likes of Ben Gvir going to play a very important role in suppressing political dissidents and putting yet more pressure on an already alienated and constantly attacked community. Do you think there will be a breaking point within the political structure of Arab parties in Israel, or do you recommend a different way to go about how can Palestinians indeed stand up to this this new fascist movement that is growing within the Israeli government itself?
Okay, thank you. I will really start with a very important point that Dr. Sami has mentioned, that those who can answer the question whether this frank true self of Israel as an apartheid state, whether we will benefit from this frankness and straightforward, very violent picture of the ground that Israel is an apartheid, she has nothing to offer to the Palestinian, whether we will benefit from that is not an Israeli question. It is a Palestinian question. It is 100% a Palestinian question. I don't believe that Israel will manage to face the triple consequences of this frank apartheid image. She will manage. If she loses its liberal supporter, she already has developed a dictatorship countries and the dictatorship and fascist supporters, which can compensate for the loss of the liberal supporters. So I don't rely on the international support which Israel will lose, because she will compensate. And I don't think that the new international discourse of apartheid, of Israel as a colonial, will have a real impact if there is no clear national discourse of the Palestinian people. This is the very critical starting point. It will not benefit the Palestinians to have international support and to have a very unified and clear vision and perception about Israel as a colonial state, as long as they don't have a unified national project, and one discourse, or at least a kind of consensus, So regarding the question about the 48, I believe that we must understand how 48 will react according to how the West Bank will react. I think the main factor of the Palestinian people are the Palestinians in the West Bank. Now, I think unlike the previous decade and 2 decades, where the 48 has really played a very significant role in emphasizing the colonial aspect of the citizenship, we are witnessing now, for the last 5-6 months, a kind of third intifada, but under the conditions of the Palestinian Authority oppression. This is a third intifada. We are witnessing a new kind of intifada for the first time under the oppression of the Palestinian Authority. And this is the obstacle of a unified consensus, Palestinian national liberation discourse, national liberation, new movement, or reorganizing the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian security forces are the obstacle. And I would say that the 48 will stay behind the scene, looking after what is happening on the rest, within the rest of the Palestinian communities. I think now we are influenced very much about what is happening within the PA developments after Abu Mazen, who will be influenced very much after what will happen within the West Bank. But to add an optimistic remark, it will be more difficult for the old elite, Palestinian elite, to maneuver. They didn't realize that we reached the dead end of maneuvering between liberal Israel and colonial Israel to internalize our political issue as part of the internal Israeli politics. We are coming to the end of that. And they will realize that. But the strength of our society, of our people, of the Palestinian within 48, that we are the witness, we are the strongest witness of a colonial citizenship, not a colonial Israel. And there is a difference between colonial citizenship and colonial Israel, because Israel will maneuver, will react, saying Hamas are a terrorist. We are defending ourselves in the West Bank. We are defending, but she cannot react when the Palestinians of 48 start to develop. There's discourse that we are living a colonial citizenship. It's also a colonial entity within the 48, and this is the strategic strength of the 48. And I think we are reaching, because we have no alternative, not because we want to do so. This is the 48, and this is the Palestinian people, actually. This is the tragedy of the Palestinian people. It was the right wing which helped us. He helped us to realize that there is no distance between liberation and between tasfiyah. Liquidation. This is the function, this is the added value of the right wing. There is no distance. Either you put you, or you either you phrase your struggle as a liberation struggle, or there is you cannot, there is no compromise with the current Israel, and this is good, and we will realize this, I think, within a short time. And the strategic, and I will finish by this sentence because for me it's very important, the strategic weapon, our strategic strength within the 48, that we are the witness of a colonial citizenship. We can go to international UN, international institution, creating a consensus to say there is no possibility of equality. Even as citizens, there is no possibility because we are facing a colonial state.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Haneen. I was hoping that we had more time. Ilan, are you planning to leave us, or do you have 2 more minutes? You are muted.
I'm sorry.
Ilan.
I will have to leave you. Yeah, I will have to leave you in 2 minutes. I'm so sorry.
You need to unmute original audio.
I'm unmuted. I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can
Yes.
hear you.
Do you have a couple more minutes, Ilan? With one
Only
last
2 or
question
3
to finish
minutes
with?
because there's another interview I have to give. I'm sorry about
Absolutely. Absolutely. No problem at all. And it's going to be the last question. You mentioned the New York Times editorial, where they are fearing, the future of Israel is at stake as a result of all of this. Very briefly, why do you think the fear is now, considering the fact that we have been dealing with these extremist governments for years and years? Why is the panic at this point?
I think the panic in America, and I think that's what the New York Times represents, is in particular in the Democratic Party, because let's face it, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, which is very small, one should not exaggerate its power, is far more progressive than the progressive left in Europe when it comes to Palestine. This is something I wouldn't think I would witness in my life. That I would find, the brave women who are representative of the House and some of the new people elected in the mid-elections, speaking a language which is far closer to the language I speak on Palestine. And I would still have to argue with Jeremy Corbyn and many people who I really like in Britain and I really respect, who will still talk about the 2-state solution or the right of Israel to exist and so on. So I think you have to read the New York Times in that respect, not vis-a-vis Britain, vis-a-vis the Democratic Party. The New York Times is not interested in what's going on in the Republican Party. The New York Times' role is to say to the progressive wing in the Democratic Party, you're wrong. The best we can hope for is J Street. We need a liberal, soft Zionist lobby. We need a liberal Israel. Then we can all come back to our comfortable life as supporting apartheid and Israel at the same time. This government makes it very difficult, very, very difficult. Of course, it should have been difficult before, but they, as I said, that they played a certain charade. They used word jugglery in order to cover up the problem, but they're run out of options. They're running out of options. This was a very pathetic op-ed, if you think about it. It was a plea to the Israelis, you're going to leave us naked in front of those voices in America, which, as I say, I'm not exaggerating the force, but they're changing. They're changing. African Americans are changing their position. The younger generation of Arab Americans, and especially Palestinian Americans, are very assertive. They're not like the first generation. They have a lot to say, and they have an impact. And I think this is why it is so important. It would be very, and not that I think that everything has to change in America. It's still a key country for what's going on in Palestine. Of course, other countries should play a role, but I think that's the fear. I hope it would prove to be a valid fear, but time will tell whether this is the case. Thank you so much for having me. I do apologize, this being a very hectic day that was also being overcome by traffic issues. I'm so sorry, but I'm glad I managed to do my bit at least. Thank you
And
so
we
much.
appreciate it so very much, Ilan, for you taking the time from your very busy schedule. Thank you so much. And
thank you very
thanks
much.
to
Thank you, Sami,
Haneen Zoabi
Sami and Haneen.
and Professor Al-Arian, Sami Al-Arian, for their wonderful contributions. A special thank you to Omar Qahwaji, our translator, for just staying with us and doing such a wonderful job. Thanks all, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.
شكرا.
Thank you.
مع
Thank
السلامة.
you. Thank you, Haneen. Thank you.